All right, welcome back once again to another edition of the Contrarians. This is not a regular Contrarians we're doing. This is one of our notorious worst album editions, which usually get a lot of heat. We've definitely got a lot of heat with the last Rush one, where we've talked about the first Rush album with Ryan Murphy. But yeah, now we're back again, and we've got Tim, who's been a regular on the show. Thanks for coming on again, Tim.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks for having me. I expect to. I'll take some of the heat off Ryan. Maybe he did a great job, but I don't know. I don't think this is quite as contrarian as
no. Definitely not. Definitely not. So yeah, we're talking about Yes today, the great progressive rock institution. And again, like, this is a worst album series. We'll let you know in a second what album we're going to talk about. But I just wanted to give a brief history of the band. Obviously, this band has a massive history. We're not going to go through the whole thing. In fact, you could probably hear us do a brief history of the band in the regular Contrarians episode we did, where we talk about Yes's best album. And I was in the hot seat for that. And I rated Going for the One my favorite Yes album.
Sorry, I was just pointing at it.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, look at that. Yeah, that's right. Yes. I was wondering. Yeah, you can point up and see the stuff in the background. It's amazing that all that is vinyl too. That's awesome what you did here to put up for this. So yes, we have Going for the One as our regular episode, our Contrarians favorite album episode, and you can go check that out. That's a good one to go watch in conjunction with this one. So yeah, basically, Yes is this massive progressive rock band. It's quite amazing, really, when you look back at how huge they were in the 70s. They had lots and lots of gold records, some platinums in there as well. And essentially, they were quite a challenging thing. They're a band with a lot of different personalities in the band. They've had a lot of lineup changes, although it kind of did settle in there. You had John Anderson, pretty much constant, and Chris Squire and Alan White. Steve Howe. I guess it was more so the keyboard situation that was changing a fair bit. But then they had this Drama album, which is an amazing record that's really rising in people's estimations. And then they had the big years, the Trevor Rabin era with 90125, and then moving on to Big Generator and all that. And then, as happens with all these bands, they have a certain life cycle. I mean, they were essentially a super famous band from probably the Yes album. And right up, close to the edge is the album that is often ranked as the greatest progressive rock album of all time. It's almost getting to be a cliche, but I noticed that. I've been thinking of doing an actual a progressive rock record review book of rating all the top albums, and that always comes in first, and Lamb Lies Down on Broadway usually comes in second, kind of thing. So Yes is way up there. Like I say, massive prog institution at the time. Jethro Tull was big too at the time. Genesis, not so much. They got big later. ELP was in there as well. So it was quite a cool time for progressive rock then. But yes, as we move on, you get even more lineup changes, and then you get the band more or less falling out of favor. You get up into the talk era, and the times we're going to be talking about here with Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman Howe, and Union, and then you move on, and then lo and behold, there's some extra drama later on when John Anderson is out of the band. There's a respiratory problem, and then maybe he could come back, and they should have waited for me, and all this kind of stuff. We get a guy from Montreal in there, Benoit David. He's only in there for one album, the Fly From Here album, and then he's actually out again for oddly the same kind of idea. It's pretty weird. And then they actually redo the Fly From Here album with Trevor Horn vocals on it and call it The Return Trip, which is kind of a pretty wild thing to do. But then they get a new singer in, John Davison, who's been there for a couple albums, and that's kind of where we sit. There was the ARW situation in there as well, where you had almost like two competing Yeses, and that's a very recent thing that went on. So yeah, definitely a lot of drama in this band besides just the Drama album. So as promised, this is the worst album episode of Contrarian. So we're going to be talking about one of us is in the hot seat. It's not me this time. It is Tim, and he's going to talk about what he thinks is the worst Yes album. So take it away, Tim. Tell us what the worst Yes album is.
Well, yeah, as you said, they had a major comeback in the 80s with 90125, Owner of a Lonely Hearted, #1 single. this is when they came onto my radar. I would have been about 9, I guess, when that came out, 9 or 10, and then Big Generator. And then something interesting happens in 1989 where you have this album here. I'll take the sleeve out here. And it's an aggregate or whatever you want to call it, like a business or legal firm, just names. Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe. This album comes out on Arista Records and Roger Dean artwork. Of course, I don't have this one on vinyl. I consider this a Yes album. Billboard considers it a Yes album because I don't have it out, but I've got a Billboard, one of Joel Whitburn's Billboard chart books, and the list of Yes's top 40 albums, it includes that because every single member of that band is a member of Yes, or was, or is, or would be. And it manages to sell 750,000 copies, which is pretty impressive for a bunch of old guys. It didn't have any hits. And at this time, what has been come to known as Yes West, which is the Trevor Rabin, the more commercial Yes, that did very, very well with 90125 and still managed a platinum album with Big Generator. What happens there is John Anderson decides he doesn't want to do the more commercial material. So the Anderson, I always have to look at it. Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe, get the right order there. ABWH. There's nothing catchy about that to stick in my mind. No. It's not like New Wagon or something. It's cumbersome. But he decides he wants to do a more traditional sounding Yes album. Not that I think that's a particularly traditional sounding album, especially the drums on there. It sounds very 1989 to me. Anyway, so what you end up happening is a band, really, they manage a gold record, which is pretty amazing in 1989 for a bunch of old guys playing really not particularly rocking prog music. And they do very well, of course, on the road because, of course, the set list would consist of mostly Yes songs. So then somewhere along the line, they attempt to record a second album. Concurrently, Yes West is looking for a singer, and they're trying to follow a Big Generator. So actually, one of the guys considered for that position was none other than Billy Sherwood. And I found all this out reading your book, Time and a Word, The Yes Story. Fills in a lot of the blanks on this. It's a very, very confusing time, even with all of the interviews with the various band members. Somebody had the bright idea to, hey, instead of us competing with each other, let's merge into this ultra super duper Yes with 8 members and put together this album and go on the road as this huge conglomerate of musicians, and let's see how we do. Now, skipping ahead a little bit, the tour was successful. Tour did very well. I think it would have been a fun tour to see because you had Howe and Rabin on stage, and you had Tony Kaye, and you had Rick Wakeman, you had Bill Bruford, Alan White. You got all these people doubling up, right? But the album that came out in 1991, that's the result of all of this, is Union. And it is one of the most poorly named albums ever because this album is anything but unified. I mean, it's got great Roger Dean artwork on it. I mean, the Roger Dean artwork is back. That's a follow through from the Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe, because, of course, with the Rabin era, they weren't using Roger Dean artwork. Now that I think about it, none of those Rabin albums had Roger Dean artwork. It's just kind of the way it worked out, unless you count songs on compilations. But right off the bat, I'm going to refer to the cassette version of this. I do not have this on vinyl. So right off the bat, it says up top, produced by Jonathan Elias, associate producer John Anderson. Then there's a bunch of asterisks, produced by Steve Howe, produced by Trevor Rabin with Mark Mancina and Eddie Offord, produced by Eddie Offord, co-produced by Billy Sherwood. Right away, you're in trouble. Because remember I said this is not unified. Well, these were done in all these different studios with all different combinations of musicians. I don't think there's a single track on here that all 8 of them appear on at the same time. It's very piecemeal. And it's one thing if you look at a compilation and you see all these different production credits, like say, if you're looking at a Best of Queen and some tracks say produced by Roy Thomas Baker, produced by Mac, produced by David Richards, produced by Queen and Roy Thomas Baker. Okay, you expect that. This is supposed to be a studio album, a statement, a unified band out there to, in this spirit of friendship and all of this. And it's clearly not. It's clearly a studio project. There's about a bazillion thank yous in here, which is always not, it's not good because it's like everybody's got different management. Everybody's thanking different people, and you got to thank all the equipment manufacturers. And so that's all surface stuff. That's all surface stuff. And that's all stuff that only diehard fans would know. Okay. So what are we left with then for the casual fan? We're left with the music. This was supposed to be, they obviously had high hopes for this album. They're on Arista now, which is interesting because they're continuing on from the Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe. Basically, I think, if I had to make a guess, they're using the second album in that contract as this. And I wonder, I've had this thought, if they'd have gone with Atlantic, which was their label from the beginning, would they have stayed on a major label a little bit longer? I've thought about that. Mm-hmm. So the music, what does the music sound like? Well, first of all, there's something like 14 songs on here. It's a victim of the CD age. Way too much music on here. And honestly, none of it is particularly memorable. The one song that bothered the radio airwaves at all was the Trevor Rabin song, Lift Me Up, which was the first single. That was #1 mainstream rock song for 6 weeks, which is crazy in early 91. It only got to 86 or something like that on the Billboard Hot 100. So here's a band that came off, Owner of a Lonely Heart was #1. They had other songs in the top 40 like Leave It, Love Will Find a Way, Rhythm of Love. So they were getting airplay. I don't ever remember hearing Lift Me Up on the radio at all. So that didn't do it. And your first single is always your best shot. I think they put out Saving My Heart later on as a single, and it didn't do anything. I don't ever remember seeing videos from this album. I mean, this is 1991. So it's almost like they just gave up as far as the record label is concerned and said, well, let's see if the band can make some money on tour. And they're left promoting this album that's just kind of a mess of ideas. And honestly, I don't hear much of the Bruford, Wakeman, Howe on here. To me, a lot of these songs just sound like outtakes from Big Generator. They've got that horrible high trebly drum sound on a lot of them. Other than, Steve Howe's got his little acoustic guitar piece Masquerade, but I'm reading these song titles and some of them are very long song titles. I can't think of how they go. Dangerous, Look in the Light of What You're Searching For. There's some songs that are decent, like Shock to the System. That's all right. Like Silent Talking was one of the ones that I didn't mind, but like I said, way too many songs, and it just flopped. It was a failure. I cannot believe that Eddie Offord is on here because he was like their traditional producer. There's nothing traditional Yes sounding about this album other than the personnel, and that's you got to go through song by song to find out who's playing on each song. It's just. But without all of that information, just as an album to listen to, I find it a chore. I find it like, are we done yet? This is not enjoyable, and the songs that like Lift Me Up and Shock to the System, they're only okay. There's no Yes classics on here. There are no songs that would go on to have any kind of life, except, as you mentioned, the ARW episode when you had John Anderson, Trevor Rabin, and Rick Wakeman going out with another rhythm section as a version of Yes. Actually quite a good one, I think. But they did a live album, and I actually like that live album as sort of somebody that grew up in the 80s, because they do go to the 90125 Big Generator era, and they do Lift Me Up. And it's okay in context of that live album. But I think that no one summed this album up better than Rick Wakeman himself when he said he calls this album Onion because it makes him cry. So I also, one thing I do remember is not being into the band at the time. I'm pretty sure I remember seeing this album in the delete bins a few months after it came out. So it wasn't successful. And from then, the two parties just kind of moved on, even though they coalesced later on. They never again tried anything like this. It's a cool idea on paper. On paper, it sounds like a cool idea, but there were just too many hands on the control on the faders, and too many hands on the songwriting. You probably had a lot of record company interference saying we need a hit, we need something that radio will respond to. And in the end, you've got an album that doesn't please anyone. It doesn't please any prospective fans that came on board with 90125 Big Generator. Certainly didn't please any classic Yes fans. And other than that, who have you got? You're not going to grab new listeners at this point in 1991, especially with the changing tides of rock music. So I don't know whose idea it was to put this out and think this is gonna triple the sales of all the previous albums. In the end, it went gold, and it's not even as impressive a gold certification as the ABWH album, considering that didn't even use the Yes name. So I think it was a huge failure. It, like I said, it probably hastened, Yes going back to the smaller indie labels and recording. It probably hastened the demise of them as a major label recording act, even though they continued to do well on the road. It's just very, very disappointing, very bland, very boring, and it's not an album that I reach for, unless it's a case like this when I had to remind myself, is this really the worst? Although there is one that I will mention later that came very, very close. But Union, that's my take on Union. Am I contrarian, or am I fitting the general consensus?
You're actually pretty much fitting the general consensus. I was quite surprised when I looked at the rankings. I'll get to that in a minute, but I did want to just add a little more context before that. So here's some quotes from that time in a word book. And just to explain, that publisher is no longer in business, and we've moved on with that material and done Yes, a visual biography through Weimer. And I've got actually three of those left. So if anybody wants Yes, a visual biography, it actually only goes up to 1980. So it's a big full color throughout coffee table book. And it repurposes the text from that. And the news here, we're actually going to be doing Yes, a visual biography 2, which goes from I think we're calling it 1982 to 2022. So the rest of it is going to be expanded into a big coffee table book as well. So, but yeah, I've just got literally 3 of the first one left. So Steve Howe says about this record, Union was a total disaster. The way that was mixed left everybody going, what? This wasn't the record we made. And it certainly isn't the record we made. It got other people playing keyboard and guitars on it. And really, I don't care what Jonathan Elias ever says, but that was the most insulting thing he could have possibly done. To have no skill to procure from a musician what he had hoped to happen shows that he was no kind of producer. Because when you work with a producer, all he is really doing is getting the best out of you. A producer doesn't play for you. He doesn't tune for you. He doesn't think for you. He merely manages to get the best. So that didn't happen in Union. Union was probably the most dissatisfying record, I'll tell you, equal to Asia Alpha. The whole group was resonating with dissatisfaction. The drums didn't sound right. The arrangements weren't quite the same. The guitars weren't always audible or dynamic or exciting. And we ended up with, some say it is more what John would have wanted. That's what Jonathan Elias kept saying. You haven't got your voices in because John didn't want them in. The guitars aren't in because John didn't want them in. So, I mean, you hear the stories. It's too late now. I don't care. So that's Steve Howe on it. Yeah. Rick Wakeman says, we were doing the second ABWH album in France and the management of Yes, and our management got together to discuss a merger, which seemed very logical. Sadly, it destroyed the making of the second ABWH record, but we had a Wally of a producer thrust upon us anyway, so who knows how it would have turned out. We couldn't use the name Yes because we weren't Yes. It's quite simple, really. If people leave a band, then they leave the name behind. So it just so happens that 4 people were quite important to Yes, all happened to have left and joined forces. To a lot of people, this was 4/5 of Yes. The fact is that we weren't, and Chris was perfectly correct in keeping the name Yes that was then in existence. There was no fighting at all. The press enjoyed it and made up stories, as they do. And we just got on with sorting the problem out in the best way possible. Hence the Union tour, which for my money was the best tour Yes ever did, and the Union album, which is a piece of brown, smelly excretion. So there's Rick Wakeman on it.
I remember reading that. Yeah.
Yeah. And Billy Sherwood says, I wasn't really privy to all the politics in the band at the time because I was a new entity working with basically what they called Yes West. I had The More We Live that I had written with Chris, which ended up on the Union album. And I worked with Tony Kaye, whom I met, and we've been best friends ever since. And I got to know Trevor through the process as well. In that period, I wrote the song Love Conquers All with Chris, which we tracked at the same studio that The More We Live was done at, and a couple other tunes that didn't make it to the record. So we were making music, and I wasn't really paying attention to the politics that I knew were going on. Obviously, it was crazy bringing all 8 of those people together, but from my perspective, I was just happy to be there working on my music with the guys. At the end of the day, John came in and sang on The More We Live, and it remained intact, which I was very, very happy about. The way it came out was pretty true to form. And then finally, Trevor Rabin says, this is, I guess, this is possibly from my chat with him just recently when they went out on that awesome tour. The Union album was a horrible record and a horrible tour, and it just turned out to be not a good thing to do. It still turned out to be fun, but the reason for it, I would never do it again in hindsight. Still, there was a song I wrote on that album called Miracle of Life, which I was really proud of. So yeah, it doesn't hold great memories for the guys in terms of rankings. Quite consistent. I'm quite amazed. This was very surprising seeing this. Rate Your Music, there was a fan list there, had it 22 out of 24 Yes albums. Heaven and Earth came in at 23. Open Your Eyes was last. I know Pete Pardo from Sea of Tranquility does not like Open Your Eyes very much. This is quite a contentious album as well. It's considered the Billy Sherwood kind of hard rocking up tempo, radio friendly album. Magnification's also kind of in this area. I just wanted to mention also, if you were an old school fan and having this conversation years ago, this was always the notorious one, Tales from Topographic Oceans, right? And there's a CD in the big clamshell of that, and then in sort of the same way that we ran into trouble with Ryan Murphy and the first Rush. Sometimes you could go back and say the very early Yes before they became, they had a couple albums that were kind of like pre-prog, a little more in the psych era. So it depends where you drop down. It's all over the place. But I was quite amazed in looking at this, just to continue on. Ultimate Classic Rock had Union dead last, number 22 out of 22. Obviously, this is, people count them in different ways, and they include live compilations, the half live, the half studio. Yeah, it's a mess, right? But they had Heaven and Earth number 20, so that was low. I'm mentioning Heaven and Earth because I know that's the one you wanted to mention as well. So I'm bringing this into this. Stereo Gum had Heaven and Earth dead last at 33. Open Your Eyes was 32. Union 28. So we're very consistent with all this. Best Ever Albums had it 12 out of about 50, so they had it quite high. Ranker, which is an aggregate of the rankings, had it 20 out of 23, and they had Heaven and Earth number 23. And a Reddit user put out a very nice kind of poll and a little bit of a discussion of it. They had it at 16 out of 20. And I just wanted to mention just a quick short review. Ultimate Classic Rock said of Union, after John Anderson left, Yes 90125 lineup to form Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe, an alternate Yes in all but name. A schism was created when somebody had the bright idea of combining the two groups that only amplified the worst tendencies of each outfit. Toss in a raft of superfluous session players, and you've got a hot mess with about as much personality as the voice on your GPS. So there you go. You're actually very consistent. And again, I guess I'm telegraphing this a little bit, but Heaven and Earth, you said that it got really close for you, right? Tell us about how you almost wanted to go with Heaven and Earth.
Just one last thing with Union, and just as a quick look for the credits, I read at least 7 different studios were used.
Wow.
So, who mastered this? Should be.
That might be a record, eh? Mastered by Greg Calby at Sterling Sound, New York.
Yeah. But I mean, so the poor Greg Calby has to master this and make it sound, again, unified. And not like, a burned CD, or a compilation of songs that were done at various periods over the years. So, yeah, what a mess. As far as the Yes catalog, I got into the band I guess it's been almost 5 years now. So I got into the band listening to this stuff as one big chunk. So even though I remember Big Generator and all of those albums vaguely on the peripheral coming out, I wasn't following the band. But so when I go back and listen, I don't like a lot of late 60s stuff. I actually don't mind those first two Yes albums. I think there's a lot of strong material on there. It's not exactly prog, but I can listen to it and not feel like there's mold growing on me because it's so old, even though it is. But I think there's songs like Van and Traveler that point the way to the future. So, compared to like early Alice Cooper or early Deep Purple, those early Yes albums are fine.
Yeah.
But yeah,
well recorded too. They sound good too, and they are truly a cross between Psych and something that didn't really exist yet. Depending on what you think of the Moody Blues at that time, but really, I always look at 1970 as the start of prog, and so you definitely hear that. But they're well recorded and they're really professional, and they sound kind of mainstream rock too at the same time. Mainstream rock, pop, Psych, and this nascent idea of prog. But I digress. Go ahead.
Yeah, not bad. Listenable albums for sure. Now, sadly, in the latter half of Yes's career, Jeff Witcher and I did a two-part episode where we went through our Yes CD collections. We had to do it in two parts, and the second half was top-heavy with live albums and compilations, and that happens with most of these veteran bands. But I was really, really disappointed with this album. Heaven and Earth. This almost. I messaged Martin over the weekend. I said, "Is it too late for me to change my mind? Because this is just bad." Now, Union won out because of all of the problems we mentioned. It being recorded all of these different ways with so many different hands in it, and that's worse because at least this sounds like one band recording with one producer in one studio. Okay, so it's got that going for it. It's just a very, very poor selection of songs. If this album had come out and said, hey, these are outtakes, we did fully recorded versions of them. These are outtakes we did from Fly From Here or Magnification or, one of the latter day albums, submitted to you for what it's worth. It might have been like, oh, okay, that's interesting. But as a new band project to, foist upon the world, it's just very, very boring and bland, and there's no life on this. And it's so sad that this is the last Chris Squire, the last new album with Chris Squire, because it's just a dud of an album. Really, really bland, soft melodies, and with a producer like Roy Thomas Baker, you'd think he'd have cracked the whip more and said, "Come on, boys, we need two more songs that are really upbeat. We at least need something upbeat to start the album off." But no, they don't even go that route. So, yeah, again, I have a hard time remembering these songs. In a World of Our Own, I guess, was one of the more decent ones. To Ascend, maybe, or I might be getting that mixed up with something else. But yeah, just kind of a flop of a failed album, and which is a shame because you mentioned this. I really like this album, Fly From Here, and I don't even mind the Return Trip version. Yeah, I think there's a lot of successful songs on here, and it actually breaks a sweat. You actually remember that this is a rock band. You have to remind yourself listening to Heaven and Earth, like, this is a rock band. I'm really glad that Heaven and Earth isn't going to go down as the last new Yes album, because as a relatively new fan, I was thinking, boy, it'd be nice to have at least one good Yes album come out. I actually think the new one's pretty decent, The Quest, but Heaven and Earth is what they were thinking, putting that out without at least one or two more really upbeat songs. I just one or two really good, strong, upbeat songs might have framed the rest of that material in a different light. But again, I'll make Union my choice for the worst because of the reasons I just said. It doesn't even sound like a band doing Union. It sounds like a project. It sounds like, it might as well have been a John Anderson, Trevor Rabin sort of merger where you had like two main singers and a whole host of session guys behind them. It's kind of what it is, just using a marketable brand name, which is the only reason it went gold. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'll go back to Union as the worst, but Heaven and Earth is knocking on its door.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Yeah. Good job. Okay. So yeah, let us know what you think in the comments below. If you think this is truly the worst Yes album. I mean, it seems like there's quite a bit of consensus out there, which is, the funny thing is this really contrasts with the episode we just did on Rush, because we had so much Facebook comments in general about that. And people were bringing up many, many, many different Rush albums as their least favorite. And I got to thinking when I was reading all those comments, is like, there are a lot of Rush fans that don't like a heck of a lot of different Rush albums, so it's going to be interesting to see what you guys think of this one. I wanted to ask you though, Tim, where are we at on Unspooled, the book, and where can people find out about it at this point?
Well, it's in the printing process now. I'm hoping to hear any day that at least the soft covers are ready to go.
Okay.
So that's where we're at with that. As far as information on it, I've had a couple people in recent times inquire about buying them. Sadly, it was only print to order, but I'm hoping I can do another run of at least soft covers at some point.
Okay. All right.
So there's still the Kickstarter site. The information is all still there. If you look for Unspooled and Adventure at 8 Tracks, sadly, I can't sell any because, the ones that are being sent all have somebody's name on them. So that's kind of where we're at with that. Just looking to get that in everybody's hands.
Yeah. Cool. Excellent. All right. Okay, guys. So there you go. Go listen to some Yes. Go check this out. Go check out Union again and let us know. I mean, I'd like to hear. Honestly, I'd really like to hear what people think of Open Your Eyes. I definitely. That is one that seems to be polarizing, because when that came out, I really liked it. And some of those songs still go through my head on a regular basis. So I thought it was pretty catchy. And I do like the new one, The Quest. Although, I will say this. It definitely still has that very mellow, moody vibe. It's not very up-tempo, but I really love the melodies and the productions and the songs on it. I think John Davison's really coming into his own on this band, and I hope there are more records to come with these guys. But yeah, there you go. Let us know what you think in the comments below, and consider supporting us on our Patreon situation. Obviously, we have a great community over there where we do these panels on single albums, and Marco does all sorts of different shows. We've got Metal Trivia Night, all sorts of things over there. So yeah, the Patreon's a thriving community, and that's it for now. Go listen to some Yes.
That's it, dude.